Today is a really practical session, and I'm so excited about that because even when we were in our pre-planning together, it was just so helpful for me. I've already implemented some of the practical skills. For the attendees, as I said before, there's a chat function if you want to put questions in there and comments, and we'll try and weave that in as we go along. Before I start, I just wanted to acknowledge country, and to do that, I was just hoping we could take a minute, as we've all come from our various spots, and first of all, just take a minute to have a collective breath together. I like to do these on the webinars for those that have joined previously, just to bring us all together and to this space. These are really challenging times that we're in, and to access our learning and creative minds, we need to allow ourselves to take pause and breath. So as you settle in, maybe asking yourself if there's anything you need to be 5 to 10% more comfortable, whether that's a cup of tea or changing a position on your chair. So I'm going to take a collective breath. So I'm going to breathe in if you wanted to join, and breathe out. And as I do that, just thinking about my feet as they're placed on the floor now and acknowledging country. I'm calling in from Victoria, from Wurundjeri country, and there's people from all around Australia and around the world actually on this call. And in Australia, there's 500 plus nations that make up this beautiful land of ours. And I wanted to acknowledge the seas, the trees, the breeze, and the traditional custodians of this unceded land. So to Melissa and Fiona, I'm just going to do a quick introduction, and I'm going to pop your bios into the chat afterwards so people can sort of read a lot more, but so we can just sort of get into the detail. So Melissa, it's like the Brady Bunch. I don't know if people can see this, but I just love these light movements. So Melissa up above is someone that I've been fangirling and stalking for quite a while. She is an experienced early childhood teacher and a teacher of the deaf. And she's incredibly passionate, as you will see today, about telepractice and in particular family-centred practice. And she's currently completing a PhD around on the use of telepractice to deliver family-centred early intervention to children who are deaf or hard of hearing. And she is also consults organisations on how to implement services which might be helpful for you all. And we're really excited to, in the future, hopefully be working together on providing you more support together with Melissa. And Fiona, hello. Fiona is the manager of Royal Far West Disability Services in the Windmill program. And so this program is around reaching rural areas, ensuring they have the same access to the same standard of service as their peers in the city. And one of this component is what Royal Far West calls telecare, which Fiona will talk about today. And Fiona also has a private practice as well, which is using telepractice to connect with clients. So welcome. And I think, you know, and I mentioned this in the first webinar, but I wanted to say it now before we get into the detail, that us three are very passionate about a number of things that I'm sure we'll go down rabbit holes on in this chat. But one of them being that telepractice is not a response to COVID-19. And it's actually a fantastic and amazing tool that a number of us have been using for years to connect to children. And that I just wanted to be explicit about that, to honour the integrity of telepractice and the way we can connect with children and families, and that we would never offer a plan B or a lesser quality to children that couldn't access services in person, and this is very much of high quality. So just wanted to put that out there at the start, because whilst a lot of people are using this opportunity to use telepractice, which is incredibly exciting, we are hoping that this is something that is integrated long term, because it works, and hopefully we can demonstrate that today around really just how powerful it is as a way to really cement best practice. Any comments so far? I'm already sick of my voice as per usual, so let's just get into it. And Melissa and Fiona, any comments?
I think that was a great way to kick off this session, and really looking forward to sharing some of the ideas that we talked about. And I think that sense of, I know a lot of people here today are here because they have to be, not because they've chosen telepractice. And I really want to encourage you to have an open mind, and I hope that we can change the way you think about telepractice so that it does carry on into the future.
And I guess the only thing I'd like to add is what's really lovely is both Melissa and I are teachers, rather than the other disciplines, which is speeches and OTs, seem to take the mainstay of telecare. So it's really exciting for me, because it is one of the things I'm really annoyed about, that we're a dying breed of, and I think the educators being able to take this space, and particularly in early intervention, is hugely important. So, yay, the special educators.
Yay, brilliant. And sorry, I just want to make one quick comment about terminology. So I know that Fiona uses telecare and I use telepractice, and you may hear other terms as well. But generally, sort of telehealth and telemedicine is much more of an umbrella term that's used a lot more in clinical and medical fields. And the telepractice is usually allied health types of fields. Teleeducation you might hear, and telecare. I'm not sure, Fiona, if you want to comment on that at all.
No, I think it was just the term that RFW devised to have it stand out from anything else in those early days. I mean, we've been doing it for about 5 years. So, one of the pioneers in it, really. And I guess everybody came up with their own kind of brand, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right, well, I'm going to share the slides, and just an acknowledgement to the wonderful Yvonne, who's in the background, who is just working around the clock to do marketing and get these events out and make the slides look pretty. So as I go to share, can you see that?
Yes, now we can.
Okay, wonderful. So here we are, Plan for Success. So for attendees on the call, we are just going to be talking to these slides. Well, I'm not. I'm going to be listening and learning and frantically writing, and have a bit of a conversation. As I mentioned before, please pop any questions into the chat and we can all see that and try and answer those for you. So back to basics. So Melissa, did you want to start off with this comment on the slide?
Sure. So as Anna alluded to, I've been doing telepractice for quite some time. I've been in this space for about 15 years, and I've been teaching and working with families of deaf children for, gosh, I can't even count how many, probably 20, almost more than 25, I think. But I think the thing for me that's so special about telepractice, and why I get so passionate about it, is that telepractice really allows us to go back to the basics and really embrace the principles of family-centered practice. Because it's so easy to get caught up in the moment when we're in person with families, but when you're on technology and working through technology, you really have to take a step back, and it really puts the family back at the center, and focuses on some of the things that you see here in terms of the relationships. But for me, it's really such a powerful tool for getting back to the best of family-centered practice. Fiona, did you want to?
No, absolutely agree. I think that it's probably the most important tool that we've ever had to properly implement family-centered practice, because the families are the doers. You know, they're the ones that have to do it now. We can't be the fixers. And as I said the other day, having to sit on my hands and not do the jigsaw puzzles and turn the pieces around, it's just wonderful. I don't have to do that because I simply can't do it. And I think that's just fabulous about telepractice, and one of the most exciting things about it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things people worry about with telepractice or telecare, whatever you want to call it, is that you cannot develop good relationships, and you cannot have the same sort of rapport that you have when you're in the room with a family. And I think it's harder and you have to work at it more. But again, I think that makes it better because you actually take the time and put the effort in to establishing those relationships and really developing them.
I agree. And I think going into homes gives you a greater sense of that relationship too. You get to see a lot more than you would regularly. But that relationship part is so much more important than just taking a history in a clinical setting, because you know that you have to be able to work with that mum or that dad or carer, whoever it might be, in such an almost intimate way of being able to understand where they're coming from as well.
Yeah. And when you do that, I think you're able to really focus on, so the third point on this slide is about role release, where parents are part of the team. And I think as educators and I'm going to assume there's some therapists on the line as well, I think we in early childhood are used to a transdisciplinary team model around the child, and that idea of role release and key workers and really having to share our knowledge and expertise and let other people take charge of a session. And I think we sometimes forget that parents can take that role on very well if we allow them to and give them permission to.
And support them too.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Anna, you just jump in anytime. Otherwise, Fiona and I'll just keep rabbiting on.
Can I just ask one thing? Somebody's got a thing down here. Karen Hagen has raised a hand. Do you want us to be answering those questions, Anna, or?
No, it's okay. I'll throw them to you as you go along.
Okay, cool. And there's another one just raised a hand too. So yeah, thanks.
Oh, and Jenna, thank you. Role sharing is a much more approachable term than role release. I really like it.
Yes.
You have to forgive me because I'm in research mode at the moment. So I am knee deep in all sorts of research articles in academia. So I'm very much on the old terms here.
Start by talking about the setting up of the environment. I mean, we're going to get into what an individual sort of sessions will look like, but just as a whole around that importance.
Yeah, and I think somebody had sent a question ahead of time today about which platform is secure and private, and I think that's a really important consideration when you move into a telepractice world, that you do need to be conscientious about the family's data privacy and security. And in Australia, we are governed by the Australia privacy laws, whether you're in person or on technology. And unfortunately, it's not always easy to work out which platforms are compliant with that and which ones aren't. But I think as a general rule of thumb, you can assume they're not. Usually, in order for them to be compliant, they cost a lot of money. So Zoom free version generally isn't compliant, but Zoom for healthcare, which is about $200 US dollars a month, I think is compliant. So the best recommendation I can give you is to go to cyber.gov.au. They've got some really good, helpful guidelines there. And they also have a help number that you can call if you wanted to ask some specific questions. And just bear in mind that no matter what platform you use, you should really get written consent from the families and explain to them that you're doing everything you can to mitigate the risk and abide by privacy laws, but that there's always a risk when we're using technology. Did you have any other thoughts or experience with that, Fiona? Because I know you use different platforms from me sometimes.
Yes, we've been using GoToMeeting, which has been purchasing a variety of licenses for that. We have moved on to Zoom and using Zoom currently. I know there's a lot of considerations from our clinical governance team around the use of that. So I was actually just listening to your points. You're more advanced in the cyberspace area there. But yeah, I think that's really interesting, that point about the permission from the family, because I don't know that that's something that happens a lot. So yeah, I think that's a really important, first conversation matter. Yeah.
And I think that as a general rule of thumb, if it's free, nothing's free in this world. So if it's free, you're probably giving up your data. You're probably paying for it in data and privacy. So if you're paying for it, you probably have a better chance of security, but always be extra conscientious about that. And that's just one aspect. Obviously, the technology, everyone focuses on the technology, but really the technology is just a tool. And once you've got that sorted, you can move on to the important relationships and practices. Oh, Linda, good question. How do you get written permission when working online? Now, you have to forgive me because I'm going from a world where we were choosing to do telepractice, and so we had ways and means of seeing families in person if we needed to. But often we would just do, you could post it to them if you wanted to, or in the first session, you could do a verbal consent and actually get them to record it. Yes, thank you. And get them to write, like sign something right then and there and show it to you. And then you can actually get them to post it or scan it back to you.
I think also to return email, saying I hereby give permission for this to be, if you've got a template that you send out to the family that they could do, probably.
Yep, great idea. And I think, Fiona, I know you spent a lot of time working on your environment today. Do you want to talk about this environment setup?
Yes, just a little aside there. I had to leave my home where I was supposed to be doing this and come down to our building at Manly because my internet refused to work. So it was a bit of a funny arrival. I think environment's really important. You need to talk to the family about where the sessions are going to occur, what they're going to be using. Is it a computer? Is it a laptop? Is it their iPad? And so that there's some really clear ways of how you're going to be working with them too. So that the iPad, for instance, is quite good. You can move that around. You can put it on the ground. You can put it beside hands being used, whatever it might be. I also think too about whether or not other participants might be involved, i.e. the siblings or dad or grandma, one of the other carers, who else might be around. I think that's quite important, that you're establishing who's there, because as the facilitator, and that's the term I'm going to use, I think you need to be able to be involving everybody as much as possible.
Yeah.
Even to where you're actually doing it. It doesn't have to be in a darkened room or another area. It can go outside. It could, you've done a list of, as somebody said in the email in the session last week, doing things on a trampoline. Well, the laptop and the iPad can go outside and watch that, and that kind of list of resources that the family might have is also part of that environment and setting up the right environment.
Yeah. And I think it's important also to think about your own environment. If in this uncertain, strange times where we're working from home in potentially an environment we wouldn't normally be in, you want to make sure that you are in a quiet and private space, and preferably with a door that can be locked, or put a sign on it that says do not disturb, so that you're maintaining that family's privacy, and also having as few distractions as possible for you as the provider, and making your full attention dedicated to the family at the same time. Things, again, the basics of having a good webcam and having a headset makes a big difference, and not only for hearing. I find it really useful. A lot of what I do is around speech and language with deaf children, and so I find it helps me to really differentiate specific sounds with children's speech, but it also is an added layer of privacy for families, so there's nobody, if there's somebody outside my office door, nobody's going to hear what's going on from the family's end. So I think that's important, and also cuts down on the echo. So really think about your own personal setup, and I feel like I'm a bit in like a jail cell or something today, because I've come into my spare room. Working from home, my office desk has become a complete disaster, so I decided to just set up a new office today. And I haven't hung anything on the walls, but actually having a little bit less clutter behind you makes it easier for the family to focus on you. There's fewer distractions. You can get the lighting right, make sure that you're able to be seen and heard. So when you're setting up to do telepractice, you want to be providing a good model for the families, and you want to be doing the best you can in terms of communicating with them.
Comes back to that professionalism, I think, of this, as you would do, you know, again, this isn't plan B, it's plan A. How would you do it in person, you know?
That's
the same,
exactly right.
exactly the same things, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a great point. And I think, you know, one of the things I think about, like today, I did bring my cup of coffee, but if I was going to a session with a family, I wouldn't, because I wouldn't bring a cup of coffee to a family, but I'd bring a cup of coffee to a meeting. So really keeping that professional hat on about what would you do in person, what's acceptable in person. I don't wear my pajamas to the office. I'm not going to wear them even from the waist down in a teleconference.
Fiona, were you going to say face-to-face land before? Because that's my new favourite.
I did, and that because I have to be very careful because we are in face-to-face land. I should say in person. Yeah. So I pull myself up on saying the wrong thing. Sorry.
It's not wrong. It's just evolved.
Yes, it is.
Face-to-face land is a great saying. I'm going to move on, ladies, so we can just talk about. We can keep going. Onto our favourite thing to talk about between us three in terms of this model, and this is something that I talk about often. The link down below, I'm sure many people that have seen me speak before have seen that I speak to a lot. So I might throw to you both about coaching and how incredible this platform is for it.
Well, you know, in our discussions between the three of us, I don't think you'd find three more committed people to family-centered practice. It is absolutely the way to go, and this technology promotes it 150%, because you are building the capacity of whoever that carer is that is sitting beside that child, which is glorious, I think. Coaching, being able to support and direct's not the wrong word, but uphold their skill development is absolutely fabulous. And this is the best way of doing it, because you simply can't step in and take over.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right, Fiona. I always see, a lot of people say telepractice is just the same, it's just through technology. And I am a firm believer that it is not the same. You cannot just take what you've always done in person and suddenly deliver it in exactly the same way through technology. It just doesn't work that way. And you really need to adapt and adjust and just create new ways of achieving the same outcomes. I've always said that I think working with families, you know, in that collaborative way that you're saying, I think telepractice really gives us the perfect opportunity to put the parent, to promote the parent from passenger to pilot, right? Get them out of the passenger seat and up into the pilot seat. And I think now in this crazy time, we're not even on the plane anymore. We're over here in the control tower, and we really need to think differently and just approach the way that we're coaching families differently, because we've got to find new ways to share our knowledge and expertise and really enhance that collaborative relationship with families.
I think that's a beautiful analogy of being in the control tower rather than in the cockpit. I haven't thought of it like that before, and I think that's absolutely perfect. We are, you know, we're giving the tips, the assurance, you know, the far side, if you like, view, and the families are actually the ones who are doing the manoeuvres. You know, I love it. I love
That's
really
right.
Nice analogy.
That's right.
We'll pop that one in the Melissa McCarthy's quote. Millions off.
Thanks, Anna.
All right. I'm just conscious of time, and I just want to get into this, into the detail of the session. So I feel like, I mean, for me, is there any other comments on that? I feel like that mindset shift is crucial, and that you really do move to the facilitator model, which is basically putting in action what we've been talking about, which is moving from doing things to things to people, and then getting ourselves out of jobs, hopefully.
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely. We should always be looking at making ourselves redundant, you know, and if we're not doing that, then we're not doing a good job, really, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you need to think about before? So this is for everyone on the call. We're getting into sort of session planning now. So what do you think thinking about before a session with a family?
Yeah. So I think it's all about preparation, and I think especially when you're just starting out in telepractice, there's a lot more preparation and a lot more that you have to think about, simply because there's new ways of doing and being and interacting, and you've got to give yourself time to learn those things. So setting expectations and rapport building, I think, is really important. Setting expectations for yourself as well as setting expectations for the family. So it's a good opportunity, really, when you're starting on this telepractice journey, to stop and recalibrate with families, so that you can just kind of go, well, wait a minute, we're doing something differently now. This is what I think it would look like. How would you feel about this? And really take the time to talk to families about how that relationship might change. Somebody's asked about populations where parents and caregivers aren't engaging as much with the service. And I think parents always have the capacity. We actually have to shift our expectations. So their capacity to be the pilot in the therapy situation may be one particular type of activity or game or routine that they do with their child. And we might have to rethink what it is that we're expecting. So shifting our expectations so that we can allow the family to engage in a way that is suitable for them.
Shift and adapt, I think. I can think we work with a few families where the parents also have intellectual disabilities, and how we work with them is supporting them and finding, again, that strengths. What's the thing that they love to do? They love reading stories with their families. So how you incorporate that into your session more than you possibly would with another session, for instance. I think that's crucial to understand that parent capacity and the support and the enablement of that, rather than just saying, oh, they wouldn't be able to cope with that,
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think it goes on to the next point, which is setting caregivers up for success. If we're not expecting them to take on the role of therapist or educator, we're expecting them to take on the role of parent. And how can we best support them as a parent to interact with their child? So, asking them what they like to do with their child and what's working for them and what's not working for them, what's hard. Sometimes what's hard for them are the best things to work on if they're really struggling.
I think that's that goes back to sort of one of the things I remember as an undergraduate with families saying that they really struggled with having to be the doer all the time. This was in sort of early days of early intervention. And I think it's one of those things that always stayed with me. So it was never about making the parent the primary clinician, for want of a better term. That's a very medical term, but the person that did everything without the support. And I think, just as I said before, making things that are right for that family, or adapting things that are right for that family or that mum, so that it's not about sitting at a table with trying to do a therapy session with them, but it's about that gorgeous, singing a song when you're in the bath or at the dinner table. It's fun, it's great, and that's what makes it enjoyable. And of course, it's not therapy anymore, it's fun, and you're going to have more success with that. And I think that's really, really important for families, that they have and that's that role of us as being a facilitator. We're stepping back and actually saying, oh, I love that, that's so great, I've got a new song, or whatever it might be, and I think that's so important.
Yeah. And all of those things that we've just talked about are really this idea of capturing the context for that family. So, talking to them about maybe what cultural differences might exist in that family that we need to be aware of, what resources they have available. Like you were saying, Fiona, what does the backyard look like? Grab the iPad, take me on a tour of your house, show me around. I want to see what's going on. Who's part of your family, who's going to be there, what's the interests and strengths of the child and the family, what can we build on, because remember, family-centered practice is all about building on family strengths and enriching their capacity. So if you start with asking them what they know and getting the wisdom from them, then you can help to facilitate those interactions much more fluidly.
Absolutely. And particularly utilising SIBs wherever possible. I think that's a lovely thing because, at the end of the day, so many children learn because, of what their siblings doing and they want to do the same thing as them. So being able to incorporate siblings in sessions, I think is a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah. And I think just before Anna moves us on, because I can see she's getting itchy, I do want to say it's so important to do the tech testing with yourself, with your family. I cannot tell you, I was probably in here for a half an hour before the session today, just double checking things because it's the first time I had everything set up in this room. And I already can tell it's dark because it's raining now and I know there's probably not enough light on my face and I want to jump up and fix it. So so testing that stuff rather than in the moment trying to solve it is so important.
Okay.
And
or driving to Manly from St Ives, which I just did.
Yeah.
When you ask for something that the other person can do that. So Melissa, you're welcome to stand up and change the lighting if you want.
I might just do that. If you can see me okay, I won't bother. But if you think it needs to be a bit brighter, I will. Okay.
Fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. We'll move on to...
I think that just before you go on, I think that goal setting too is quite important. I think sometimes families are just completely overwhelmed, particularly with the very vague NDIS goals. So to be able to hone them down a little and say, well, these are the sort of things that we can do in these sessions, but it's not just about me in the session. This, you're going to go on with working on these things all the time, so they don't feel like it's this big, enormous chunk that they've got to swallow. It's a lot easier to break down a bit, probably with telecare.
And don't be afraid to do it differently. So just because you go to a home visit for 90 minutes doesn't mean you have to have a telepractice session for 90 minutes. You could do 3 half-hour sessions, one at morning tea, one in the afternoon when the siblings are home, and one at bath time. Use the technology to your advantage. And that's a wonderful part because you can,
you can do it at 8 o'clock, and maybe you don't do it in your jammies, but you could. I mean, theoretically, you can put on your shirt on the top, and to deliver it. Yeah.
Maybe you would put on your jammies,
absolutely,
to be in the right context.
Absolutely, really good point.
Just wanted to throw to Sarah, who asked a great question on what would be some tips on how you usually do a tech test?
So for myself, I would just, for example, we're using Zoom today. So I just logged into a Zoom call and tested my audio, tested my video, and then I didn't like what was going on because it was too sunny. So I closed the window and I just came back and had a look, rearranged a little bit because I have a mirror on that wall. So I changed the angle of the computer so that I had less glare behind me. So that's what I would do for my own check. And then with a parent, I would schedule a test call and say, let's just try it out, and get them to do the same things. Show me where you want to have the session. Let's try the video. Do you know how to? And you really need to know how to do it first so that when you call them, you can work through the steps with them. So if they don't know how to turn on the video or they don't know how to change their microphone, that you can actually troubleshoot that with them.
I think that's quite important, particularly if you're going to do something outside. So, just take your iPad out and show me what it's like, because they mightn't realise it, but when they put that iPad down or hold that iPad, you've got the sun glaring into it, so you can't see. So it's just simple little things like that can be, 10 minutes before it actually starts. Could be at the end of the final session. So next time we're going to go and do it outside, let's have a quick look at it now. You can use that time really well just to make sure that it's going to be the best thing.
Yeah, I think we missed a sort of a fundamental point that we had a great discussion about yesterday, in terms of that asking all the time around what support do I need. I mean, in this case, we've made a reference to it might be that you might need more guidance, tech support, but really getting in that flow of asking yourself what support do I need before sessions, during and afterwards, for self and for the logistical, and also just, yeah. Does anyone want to make a comment on that?
So are you talking in terms of resources? Is that what you were meaning, Anna?
Yeah, resourcing self and within, I guess, just being able to reflect on the process that you'd be taking with the family, and just being able to sort of ask yourself, what support do I need?
And also what support the family does. So for instance, if you were doing something that required, I don't know, visuals for cooking or something like that, that family had a copy of those visuals, those sort of quite fundamental things I think are important too. Melissa?
I think, that idea of don't be afraid to fail, right?
Yeah.
It's not easy. It's new. You're learning new skills and things might go wrong. And it's okay to not know it all. Yes, we'd love to pretend we know it all. And I always advocate faking it till you make it if you can get away with it. But sometimes it's just not possible. And sometimes the tech breaks down or things happen, and all you can do is be prepared. And so you've just got to be able to say to the parents, look, this is new, we're testing it out, here's what I know, here's the backup plan, right? So if for some reason this all falls apart, you've got my mobile number, just ring me, or better yet, say, if it all falls apart, I will ring you within 5 minutes, so that you take the pressure off the parent. So just really, I think, being conscious that this is new, and I don't think there's, most parents know that people are just starting out, and don't be afraid to have those conversations and ask for help.
Agree. Yeah, and say, I'm sorry, I'm a Luddite, which is what I very frequently claim. I'm not good at this. I'll have to check with my children. And I don't think that hurts at all to be human and fallible.
Yeah, ask for help.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're not doing it because we love technology. We love relationships and want to find different ways to strengthen those. That's why we practice. Yep.
That's right.
Okay, keen to move the next slide. Yeah.
You keep us on track, Anna.
Yeah. Sorry, I want to just be doing this for days, but I'm sure people have a life other than me. So what do you need during the session? So we've done a bit before, and post any questions into the chat if you've got more on that. What do you need during the session?
Well, one thing, I guess two things. We've talked a lot about working collaboratively, and for me, that's a lot about asking the parents questions and asking them what they're seeing and asking them to give me feedback on what's happening, because sometimes you can't hear the child, or the child runs off screen and you can't see them, and that's okay as long as you and the parent have a relationship that allows you to say, tell me what's going on. And I think that really enhances their confidence and their ability to take that leadership role in the relationship.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I'm just thinking about a session that I did last week that the little fellow saw the cat walk past the window, and that was it. He was gone with the cat. But we were able to, whilst he was still off with the cat, Mum and I were able to talk about some things, and maybe, so next week, how about I incorporate a story about a cat, and what does he love to do? Oh, he loves feeding the cat. Okay, so we might do some numeracy about how many bits of, cat food we're going to put out, or whatever it is. And it actually gave me time to focus in on that child's interests and strengths, which was still the session, even though he was off with Ginger. You know, I think sometimes it's you get a better chance of doing that. Because if I was in person, I would, or mum would go and get the child and bring them back instantly, you know, whereas this, it gave us time to talk and he came back eventually. Yeah.
I had a similar incident last week where we were playing with Play-Doh, and the little munchkin had an elephant and was feeding Play-Doh to the elephant, and showed it to Dad, and then went over and showed it to Mum, and then came to the computer and showed it to me, and then ran into the kitchen. And I said, "Where's he going?" He's looking for the dogs. He was calling out to the dogs saying, you know, "Look at my elephant." And it was beautiful because we could say, look at that great social opportunity. He's really aware of how important that language is. So it was a really exciting opportunity. So I think often people worry that they have to keep the child right there, engaged on the screen all the time. And it's not about that. It's about natural environment and what's happening and how do we facilitate those interactions that are achieving the goals. And I always say to people, look, technology is brilliant, but it's just a tool. Right? Don't over-engineer it. You know, I had somebody last week telling me that she had just, in this current state of affairs, transitioned to telepractice, and she had this, like, her favorite therapy game was to have these little plastic animals and a tissue, and the child could pick an animal, and they put the animal to bed, and they cover it up with a tissue, and they say goodnight. And she just didn't know how she was going to do that on telepractice, and she was so excited because she had found this app, or something which I'm sure some of you know, called Boom Cards, which allows you to make things. And she said, I built this app with pictures of animals and a blanket, and so the kid could click and drag and put the blanket. And I said, did you think about asking the parent if they had some animals and a tissue and that they could do the activity? So don't over-engineer it. Just because you have technology doesn't mean you have to use it.
Comes back to that that old adage of the therapist with the bag full of magic resources, you know, that disappear and they're not used on until the next time the therapist appears. I tend to try and find what there is within the home, you know, what you can use and how you can use that. Again, that's obviously the child's interests. That's what they like playing with. So you need to utilise that in how you're interacting, I think.
Yeah. I'm not dissing Boom Cards. They're awesome. Just saying, think about what you're trying to achieve. And I think that goes back to this comment here. Sorry, I just dropped my notes. This comment about be curious around the direction of energy. If you're focusing on the child, you're missing an opportunity to empower that parent. And so you really need to be focusing on the caregivers if you're trying to follow family-centered practice principles.
And step back away and your turn, you know, your turn. Show mum how you do it. Mum, show me how you might, you know, do this with that child. I think that's it comes back to us being more facilitators and coaches rather than the direct deliverers. I think
that's right.
It's, you know, really important there.
That's right. And if we're focusing on those daily routines and the home environment, and we've already worked out with the family's input what their preferences and strengths and interests are, then it's a lot easier to work that way. And in fact, it's sometimes such a relief to not have to think about what toys am I packing today, and you know, my shoulder's killing me from lugging this trolley full of toys and games and books. And it's nice to sometimes switch that focus back to the family.
It is. And I think even the families that don't have a lot, I'm just thinking of a time when I was working in Auburn and, you know, there weren't a lot of toys. You still were able to create lots of fun things to do, like peekaboo behind the couch, for instance, you know, people games rather than stuff driven toys. And I think that is really important to go back to those really early developmental concepts, I guess, of, you know, it is people that children interact with first and foremost.
It is. And I think you're absolutely right, Fiona, because if we're focusing on toys and things that the family don't have access to unless we're there, there's no point using
That's
them
right.
as activities.
Absolutely.
So if they don't have toys in their home, you have to
Yeah.
look for other ways to do things. And, you know, luckily kids spend a lot of time doing a lot of the same things, you know, diapering and bathing and cooking and snack time. And those things all are full of language and early development. So
Exactly.
lots and lots of opportunities there. And sorry, just want to say one more quick thing, Anna, unless you want to jump in, Fiona, sorry.
No. I was just going to say, I think it's really particularly important for this sort of next generation coming through who have not had a lot of those play opportunities because they've been very much around screen time, you know, Game Boys, play, you know, all those sort of things. And a lot of that generation really struggle just to play. So I love when I work with those young mums and just go back to, you know, really simple play routines with them and see how they learn, you know, to wait for the child. The Hannon principles, you know, wait, look, what is it? Observe, wait, listen, you know, the owling things. And I think they're wonderful. That and telepractice leads itself so beautifully to doing that.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say, I just noticed a couple of points on that slide that we haven't talked to very much. And I just wanted to say, in telepractice, when you are taking that step back and doing more observation, you do sometimes see that the strategies you use change. So you may find that you shift more from modeling and demonstration in person to more of the coaching and guiding in telepractice. And in that situation, you sometimes have to be much more explicit about what you expect to happen, because when we're in person, we often just do things and assume that the parent understands why we've done something. But in telepractice, when we're saying to the parent, try this, we may need to be more specific about exactly what it is we want them to do and why.
I agree.
And I can see Elizabeth's asked a really interesting question over here about whether you would ask caregivers to send a video of a specific interaction or activity if it wasn't possible to capture it in a tele session. Yeah, that's a hard one. Yes, if it cannot be captured in a tele session, but I would struggle to know why it couldn't be. So that would be my challenge, is why couldn't it be captured in a tele practice session? So maybe if it was something like bath time, actually probably is a good one. You probably don't really want to be on a video call in the bath for privacy reasons. So yes, if they want to send you a video, I guess that would be a good one. I don't know if you have a specific example, Elizabeth, that you want to comment on, or if Fiona, you have any ideas about that?
I actually quite like that idea. But a snippet, you know, like one of the things we're building at the moment is a portal that families will be able to upload those sort of very short snippets for the therapist to see what that might be. It could be a problem, you know, that they're having. It could be a mealtime, whatever it is. And again, that's because we've always worked with families who are rural and remote, so we haven't got that opportunity of face-to-face, and sometimes you mightn't see them for 12 months. So you know, it's quite useful, but it does have to be short. It has to be, you know, not half an hour of watching it. There are a couple of apps around that you can do that with, where you share with the clinicians that might be working with the child, that are quite useful. You know, Same View's one that I know of that's really useful, so you can actually see where they're doing, you know, you can film it on that app and show the child, I don't know, running between the red and blue flowers or something, you know, out in the park. So it's this beautiful functionality, but they're working on colours or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Sorry, make a comment on that around, you know, telepractice as a whole. A lot of people have been doing it for years that are on here that probably think they haven't, which is phone calls, texts, emails, and also, as I work largely in remote Australia, videos are my life, not only because they don't capture things that aren't in sessions, but they show progress and their ways of engaging at a distance about families showing like a beautiful time they've had that they've been working towards or something, which sort of keeps me in the loop. And so, yeah, I also, love the use of videos, and it also helps to offer feedback as well. And I've found that Seesaw is quite a good.
Here's another one. Yep.
It's like a portfolio for students. Yeah.
I think video is absolutely a great tool. I guess for me, I'm just thinking a lot of people are jumping in with both feet into telepractice, and that just sounds like one more piece of work you're adding to your workload at the moment. So, just be careful what you offer. It goes back to that self-care and support, and don't make more work for yourself than you need to in the short term. And I just wanted to say, Paula, you've made a good point about it might be a distraction for the child to have the practitioner present during a session. And you can actually turn off your video so that you can see what's going on, but they can't see you. So that can be a good strategy as well if you wanted to see something live.
Wonderful. Shall we move? I can't believe it's 4 o'clock, as someone just said. Like, this is we just have to keep going.
Yeah, no problem.
As you said, we could all talk about this for hours.
Raging telepractice nerds. But, okay, so we've been during the session and some really helpful guidance there. Thank you. And then what about afterwards?
I think that's really important because I want the family to feel that it was a good session, not just from the practicalities of whatever the goals were for that session or the objectives for that session, but how they really feel about it. Because I think if a family's not comfortable with it, it's like any therapy. It'll only be done in that therapy session, and they're not generalised, and that's where change occurs when it's picked up and used all the time in all settings. So that's, I think, a really important question.
Yeah. And again, it's just one more way to build that collaborative relationship with families.
Their relationship, yeah.
So, when you say to them, how do you think it went? What worked for you? What didn't work for you? Here's what I was thinking. What do you want to do next week? All of those things. And then I think it's really so important to stop and take the time for self-reflection as well. To really think about, from your perspective, what worked for you, what worked for the family, what do you think you need to do differently? Just last week, one of the sessions I was in, I left the session thinking, that parent needs a different coaching strategy. I need to really stop and think next week when I'm with them about supporting her in a different way. So, you have to take that time.
It's no different, I don't think, to any therapy session, again, in person, face to face. A good professional will always do that self-reflection of how it went and what could I do better. I think, yeah.
Definitely. I think because telepractice is new for so many people, it makes it easier to stop and reflect. I think sometimes we get so busy in our day-to-day in-person sessions that we don't always take the time to do that. But you're absolutely right. It's best practice. And I think the other thing I often tell people is telepractice really forces you to be a problem solver. You've just always got to be finding solutions, and so is there anything you could do to make the session better? Do I need better lighting? Like, I'm so annoyed with myself right now that I don't like the lighting in this room. I'm going to get it better next time, so that'll be my thing for next time. Or do I need to get some IT support? Was my connection not good enough, or whatever it is, how can I adapt and make things better for the next time?
Even to that tech, going right back to that tech solution. So, some families only want to do FaceTime, for instance. Some families feel comfortable with that. Some families feel comfortable with the Zoom. Some practitioners might have the GoToMeetings. There were a number of different platforms mentioned before. FaceTime might work really well. It might be dreadful. It might, and you're able to say, because from your end it might be really bad, but from their end it's really good. So that reflection on that tech too, I think is incredibly important. How was it too pixelated? What could you see me well? Was there lag? All those kind of really basic questions that you actually really need to record almost at the end of that session so that you know.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything else on that point?
I think don't be afraid to use those other kinds of technology you talked about, Anna, sometimes an email or a phone call afterwards, because some of these platforms will cut you off automatically at a certain point. And so you may find that you need to follow up differently. And just as a point of interest, I often find that in a telepractice session, because there's only one adult in the room with the child, also trying to manage the technology, that there's less opportunity for adult conversation if that parent's trying to juggle a child and the technology, where if I'm in the room, we can kind of share those responsibilities. So sometimes I think it can be more difficult to stop and take 5 minutes to ask these questions and reflect, that you may actually have to do it outside of the session.
And also I have used the different modes as sort of a set stepping stones for some families where technology just seems like a bit too much. Just that we did once start at text messages, now we're doing phone calls. Now we're doing phone calls in real time. Now you're sending me videos. Maybe we'll try this out. But that's also been a helpful process, acknowledging that it can actually be quite an uncomfortable experience for people. Also being giving permission around that, getting warming up to having video in homes. Some families always come to services they're not comfortable with you seeing their home or being in their home. So work through those situations, I think, is really important to note. And sometimes it's not information that's offered up and something that we have to problem solve by thinking about why there might be resistance or lack of engagement.
And I've had the opposite, Anna, where some families are more comfortable with telepractice than a home visit, because they can put the computer in a corner and you can only see what the camera can see, and they can just move everything else to the other side of the camera, and it makes them more comfortable.
Definitely had that too. Also had a family that I work with, they the mother and child call me from the park, as the other caregiver is quite resistant to any support happening for that child. I've had to solve all sorts of ways of how we deliver.
Great one.
Okay, so outcomes and evaluation, and I just wanted to emphasize, I think this is the aha moment yesterday when we were planning, that it's like, oh, we're just talking about best practice. We're not really talking about anything new here. We're just talking about the way that we normally work, just using a different tool as a way to facilitate that, but really embedding best practice in a different way. Measuring outcomes and goals are the same. But do you want to make comment about how you're using those?
Yeah, sure. I think you're absolutely right. It is just about best practice. And I think for me, the realization over time that the technology actually amplifies best practice, or can amplify best practice, is really powerful. So so that's pretty interesting. Fiona, do you want to talk about the tools that you use, or
no,
I just talk about the research side of things?
Yeah, no, you talk about the research side of it. I just, the only thing I would say in that when we're looking at evaluation, it's making it as simple as possible. So we do the MPOC, which is, I don't know, 5 pages or something. So it's quite a lot more than we have a very simple little 5-question. It was on iPads that we had for everybody at the end of the week to evaluate how it went. That was in person. Similar sort of thing, we're looking at how we do that at the end of each session. Same sort of, screen sharing, that this is what I liked, or this worked or didn't work. So that is still under development, but the MPOC we do at the end of each term with the families to see how that has worked in terms of that family-centeredness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to quickly mention to everyone that's on here, we're not stating at all that you need to change your outcome measurements.
No.
No.
And that wasn't at all, or that these are specific ones to using telepractice. We just wanted to make sure that we touched on it and offer what Fiona and Melissa were familiar with. But there are so many other tools. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So basically what I wanted to just point out was the research that I'm doing. We've used the MPOC SP, which is the MPOC service provider, which is the paired version of the same tool that Fiona is using with families. And basically the literature, there's not a lot of research in the area of telepractice, but it is building, and there's quite a bit of research in specific areas of practice, like autism. There's quite a lot of research in telepractice, and there's a lot around parent coaching and naturalistic teaching. There's a lot about speech therapy assessment, but in terms of early intervention per se, it's more around parent coaching. And in my experience, what I've seen from the evidence is that it's really demonstrating that telepractice is at least equivalent to in-person services, and in some cases is achieving better outcomes than in-person services, particularly with regard to parent engagement and practitioners' use of family-centered practices. And so some of the tools that you saw on that slide are, in addition to the MPOC SP, we also used the SPICE, which is the scale of parental involvement and self-efficacy. And we use that because it was specifically designed for parents of children who are deaf and hard of hearing, and that was the cohort that we were working with. When we did that, we found that parents who received all of their services through telepractice felt equally involved and self-efficacious as the parents who received all of their services in person. So that was a terrific outcome. We were really excited about that. And likewise on the MPOC, we found that all the practitioners in telepractice felt that they were using family-centered practices to a high degree, at a similar level as those in person. So really what it's just confirming for us is that it is possible to do good family-centered early intervention through telepractice. And there is other research out there. One of the other tools that is used quite a bit in the US is called the Home Observation Visitor Rating Scale. And that's, again, designed to be used in person, but some people, particularly in the field of deafness, have adapted it to telepractice and found that it worked quite well. You just have to be careful because there are obviously some items that don't apply directly to telepractice. So things like, brings a bunch of toys into the house or knocks on the door politely. Things that just don't happen in telepractice. So if you're interested in any of the specific research, feel free to send me an email and I'd be really happy to talk more about that. I could go on and on about the research, but I won't bore the 184 of you who aren't interested.
Thanks, Melissa. Everyone will have their contact details at the end. There's a couple of questions coming through in the Q&A, and we'll just, so people can ask those, we'll jump to those at the end. Melissa and Fiona, can you see the Q&A box as well?
I can. I just haven't opened it yet because they were quite detailed. So
we'll go to them at the end. So that's fine. Just wanted to acknowledge that.
And I did see, I've just been looking at Seb's question over here about virtual backgrounds, and I'm a minimalist. I would say don't over-engineer it. I don't care if the child never looks at me in a telepractice session. If the child and the parent are having a great interaction and I can facilitate that for the family, I could care less if the kid ever talks to me and acknowledges me. So I don't want to be the center of attention. So I don't try to make myself all exciting and fabulous. And I'll show you what happens when I try to use virtual backgrounds. They never ever work for me. Hello. I don't know if I'm just don't have the right coloring for it, but they just never work. So for me, it's one more thing to break. I'm a minimalist. I wouldn't bother, but go for it if you enjoy it. Right. So challenges.
On to some challenges.
Yeah. Perceptions. This one's been, for me, mindset is everything in telepractice. And I think, like I said at the beginning, most people are not in the session today because they decided today was the best time to switch to telepractice. Most people are here because they've got a significant need to learn telepractice that hasn't been present before. And I think that difference between engaging in telepractice reactively versus proactively influences your perception of it. And that is going to in turn influence the parents' perceptions. So you really need to be conscious about what you're doing and just try to embrace telepractice as different, as, you know, not doing the same thing in a different way. It's just different. It's a new thing. It's a new way of doing things. And if you can look at it that way, I think you might feel less stressed about it not being the same as in person. So I don't know if that's helpful.
I think it's absolutely what you're saying, Melissa, as well as how you sell it. So to a family, if this is about how amazing, I'm giving you all my skills, you know, because I know you know your little munchkin better than I do, and you're going to have this amazing ability where I'm there just saying, you know, you're the expert. How can I help you, you know, bring out the best? And I think again, I'll refer back to, you know, I don't have to sit on my hands when they're doing the jigsaw puzzle, you know. You're the person that's there. You're the person that's able to actually do that interaction. And really, 9 times out of 10, the family goes, oh, wow, that's just incredible. Yeah, I can do that, you know. And I think that's it. It's again coming back. It's not plan B, it's plan A. This is this really cool new way of working together.
Well, I think what you've pointed on there, and I know someone in the chat talked about perception being an issue with a parent today that didn't want to pay for therapy session that they have to do. And I'm not sure this is a COVID-19 issue. I think this is a cultural issue that we've been dealing with as a sector for so many years around what actually early intervention is, what capacity building and coaching is, and what family-centered practice is. And I think as a whole, we've really struggled to explain and describe what it is that we're actually doing to families, with families, and what it all looks like. And now it's just exacerbated. So, yeah, I think it's at these times is we really need to be honing in on what it is exactly that we're doing and the outcomes we're achieving and how families are the main role in that.
Yeah. And I think there's a real place for the research there. Not that we want to be handing research papers to parents, but there is research that talks so much about the in-person benefits of coaching and family-centered practice. And it's well documented. It's been best practice for decades, you know. And so I think you're absolutely right, Anna. We as practitioners need to do a much better job of explaining to parents what it is that we do. And I think telepractice, as I've said a million times, gives us a perfect vehicle to be able to do that. But shifting parents from, you know, shifting expectations from, especially if they have been receiving a particular service delivery model to a new one can certainly be challenging. And that's why I say maybe approaching it as a new thing and saying to them, I understand this is what we've done before, but what we're going to do now is actually focus, take a different approach, and we're going to focus on coaching, and we're going to you know, do things a little bit differently than we've done them before, and this is what it's going to look like, and go back to those early conversations that we talked about at the beginning of the session.
Also too, I think the practical sides of it. So you know, you don't have to get somewhere, you don't have to travel for, you know, our rural families, you don't have to drive for an hour, 2 hours for therapy. How effective was that therapy when you arrived at the session? He's lost it because, you know, you've got out of the car and you haven't got the drink bottle or whatever it is. It's half an hour of screaming, yelling. You get back in the car, you have another hour back, pick up the children, the other kids that you've dropped off, get dinner on the table, get them in the bath and go, oh, what did we learn in that therapy session? Whereas here, accessing it via telecare, it's in your house, it's with your things, and I'm this visitor that pops in, you know, or the therapist is this visitor that arrives, and you've got the time. You can, you know, as soon as the session's finished, you can keep going, doing it. It's not about getting lost. And I think that's a really, really important thing for families. Excuse me.
And maybe Anna, that's something for ECIA to think about, how we can offer some professional development to practitioners around family-centered practice and explaining that to families and helping families to better understand what it means. I know you guys do all that already, but there's always more to be done, right?
Always want to be done on that. And I think one challenge we didn't put in there, but something that I'm facing at the moment in my work is that, I mean, these are unprecedented times, and people's my own bandwidth for taking on new things and trying to change my mind on things is minimal, as well as what families are holding. And so just if there's resistance in 1 hour doesn't mean that can't shift and change as you sort of continue the conversation. So I just would encourage people to continue the conversation as we sort of move along, because these are changing times and people are holding a lot. And it might seem like a lot, but those little baby steps I talked about before is actually people engaging in telepractice in small ways, if it's a phone call, etc., and then you're just moving up.
Yeah. And another strategy, Tanya, that I've found really helpful is you've said you have some fantastic parents who are flexible and happy to give it a go and learn. If you do get some good sessions going and they're confident and they're happy, letting them talk to each other and letting the parents who are a bit more reluctant talk to parents who are more successful and confident with the service delivery, or even letting them see what a session looks like if that's possible, obviously with consents and things, to show them what it looks like, so that they have a better sense of how it will work.
Yeah, peer-led models for tech testing is amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So also on that slide, we were just talking about, we talked about some of the engaging the parent versus engaging the child, that can be a big shift for practitioners, but also for parents. So hopefully we've given you some ideas about that. And we talked a bit about the support person maybe not being on board. And I think that idea of developing new ways to interact and engage, I think we've touched on that. And practitioner exhaustion, this was a big one, Fiona, that you raised in our session yesterday, if you want to chat about that a bit.
I think it's really important to acknowledge that it is very intense delivering via telecare, and it doesn't mean that suddenly practitioners are expected to see 6 children a day because you're not traveling or you're not moving around. I know that our therapists here are not just dedicated to telecare. They move between the 3 programs that we offer, simply because of that intensity. So yeah, I think that's something to really keep in mind, particularly when there's NDS bottom lines to meet, that it's not actually any less, in fact it's more intense than in person.
Yeah. And I think the last point there is a really big one that often comes up for parents about passive versus active screen time. So with all the talk about limiting young children's screen time, I think it's really important to differentiate between putting a child in front of a video on their own versus being involved in a video chat with a family member, for example, or even playing an app with a parent alongside. And there's a lot of research around that. The screen time recommendations exist for a reason, because there's research to show that really young children don't learn independently from video footage, and that they need that co-viewer facilitating their social learning, and that even things as basic as, can a young 18-month-old differentiate between a 2D and a 3D object? Well, not necessarily. So we're really making a lot of assumptions about child development and child learning when we jump into screen time. And I think that's a big discussion you could have with parents. If parents are concerned about that, there's a lot of different ways you could approach that. But when you're doing a telepractice session, it is not the same as passive screen time and should not be considered as passive screen time, because in fact, the child doesn't need to be engaging with the screen. The parent needs to be engaging with the screen and the child. So yeah, I would really try to discourage families from using that as an excuse to not participate in telepractice.
And again, it comes back to the fact that you're still a facilitator. So you're really only directing what can happen in that session, you know. Yeah.
Before we get on to the final slide, which is on tips, I think we'll end with, I might ask some of the Q&A and some of the Q&As that came through. So one of them is that, I'll just read it out. I'm feeling quite concerned about some very low functioning kids whose families do not want to engage via telehealth in any way, not phone calls or text messaging or home programs. This is sort of what we were talking about yesterday, is in the relationships prior to this, and how they've, you know, go into people's houses and things like that for families that we all change the nature.
I guess from my perspective, I'd be trying to understand why it is that they feel that it's that they don't want to participate. And we talked a little bit about how for a child that has a more severe or more complex issues, that it might be you're only doing 15 minutes or 30 minutes. And Melissa said before, you do 30 minutes in the morning and maybe 30 minutes at lunchtime, or 30 minutes the next day, or whatever. I think it's a try, a bit of a taste test, if you can offer that to a family. I know I was reading on Source Kids this morning, sort of an article from parents who are quite concerned about how they're going to be expected to deliver all those things. So I think we as practitioners have to make it as palatable and as enjoyable and as fun as for the parents as for the children.
Definitely. And I think, like you said, Anna, it may just be stepping back a little bit, not from the family, but in terms of your expectations. So maybe you're not going to get a session with that kid for the next couple of weeks or months. And maybe it's about just getting an email exchange going with the parents, and maintaining that relationship somehow. But it is tough when you don't have an established relationship, and then something like this that's so disruptive happens, and then you're trying to play catch up, really. I'm sorry, I don't have a great solution for you, but the best thing I can say is just be persistent and just keep trying. And if it doesn't work this week to get a phone call, try an email next week, maybe send a video snippet next, to the family. Send them a book. Like, I don't know if you've got access to any resources. Can you send them a resource and say, oh, I saw this, fish book, and I know how much Johnny loves fish. I thought you might like to share it together. Just try to maintain and build that relationship would be the best advice I could give you.
I would actually read that book. If it's a, I don't
great
know,
one.
Big Fish, Little Fish, something like that,
Yeah.
Read that book and send it to the family and say, upload it onto YouTube, or, private message it in Facebook, Facebook, some way that's engaging. That to me is how you start. It really is that, oh, there's Fiona. Look, she's reading, I don't know, Good night, sleep tight, whatever it is, it's their favourite story. And then the child's engaged, so that when you go, okay, well, how about we try 15 minutes on Friday to see if, he might just interact with me on the screen, and we'll read the book
I'll just
at the
read
end.
the book live. Yeah,
absolutely. First thing, what's the motivator? So yeah.
I'm gonna, just conscious that we've got 6 minutes left to go. I want to get you one more question before we go to the tips, which is Denise's question on working with children in a small group. Do you have any thoughts and ideas on doing groups online? And I know that a number of people are offering this. So do you have any suggestions on that?
If you can make sure they have an adult with them. It'll make your life a million times easier. And I probably wouldn't even be game to try a group with really young children if they didn't have a support person with them. But my biggest tip would be everybody needs to be on mute until they get some sort of, either you're in control of it or you have some secret password that they get to use that lets them be the talker. But yeah, mute everybody all the time and have a practice session first and let them go crazy. I found that's really helpful if you just let them push all the buttons and try the virtual backgrounds and, you know, talk over each other and make the square jump around. It kind of gets their wiggles out, and then you can get down to business when you're ready to actually have a session.
I can't really comment because I've never done a group session, but I know our rec team tomorrow are trialling some rec programs with some kids, not early intervention, a little older. But I think it's just try it, you know, see how it works. And again, don't be afraid to fail. Like it's okay to go, ooh, that didn't go so well. Why didn't it go so well? You know, I think we've all just got to experiment and see what's going to work and what our strengths are too, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To jump to the final few minutes.
Yeah.
So your favorite tips, what you want people to leave with. Thanks.
Yeah. So I think my biggest tip, those top two tips are my tips. So start with what you know, and focus on the outcomes. Don't get distracted by the technology and the bells and whistles. And then the second one is, if you can do it in person, there's no reason why you can't do it in telepractice. And I'm not being stupid here. Like, I know there are some things you cannot do during telepractice, right? But you can't give someone a hug, right? But you can't give someone a hug in person now either. You've got to like elbow bump or foot shake or whatever. So like, I want you to take that idea to the extreme, right? Imagine that everything you want to do is possible and then work backwards. So don't start with, oh, I can't do it. Just go like, yep, I am going to figure out a way to hug people through telepractice. And if you really take on that sort of idea, if you start from possibility, then you're more likely to find a solution that is going to meet the goal you're trying to achieve. So really believe it's possible, and I think you'll find that you'll be much more successful and more confident and more happy about your telepractice sessions, a lot less stressed. So that's my top tip.
Yeah, I agree. I go down to that preparation to, you know, make sure that you aren't going in there cold, that you do have some things prepared to be able to work with. But then on the other hand, be prepared to go where that session's taking you, you know. It's that's also equally as important. You were talking about not being able to hug or whatever. I still high five, you know, that still works. Yeah, absolutely. And your virtual hug, Anna, absolutely. And Jenna just popped up and said emojis. Yeah, cool. You know, you flick up your emojis of how great that's going. But I think that compassion and patience, you know, just honestly, every one of us is learning. Every one of us is learning every day, and always should be. And I think that's don't expect that, you know, it's going to fly first off, because it's not. And if it does, it's a fluke. You know? So, you know, the next 10 sessions could be disastrous. But you know, be kind to yourself and embrace it. Yeah. Gosh, if I can do it, anyone can. You know?
And it is such a steep learning curve, and you need to acknowledge that for parents as well, so that they don't feel like they're the ones who aren't able to make it work. You know, to tell them, oh, sorry, I was 5 minutes late today. My computer was rebooting Zoom and I couldn't get on to this platform, you know. Just let them know that it's okay, and be kind to yourselves and work collaboratively as much as you can to support each other.
Absolutely.
We're at 4:29, and so I think it's time. I feel like we should just keep going. I just can't thank you enough. I think this has been so helpful. It's often really hard to be able to get into the detail, and with people that want to actually share their own experiences and really get into that granular detail, which is I think what we really need at these times. And yeah, as Helen said, it's been so practical, and it really has been to shape what we're doing. Thank you to both of you. I just want to share your details. So, I mean, I'm not promoting people to sort of stalk you or fangirl you, but
I love stalkers. Feel free.
Yeah, go for it.
here are the two wonderful people here, and their details. As we said earlier, we're really excited to hopefully start working with Melissa and putting some things together for some more detailed coaching. And Fiona's details here as well around the incredible work Windmill's doing and her private practice as well. So thank you. Just to close, as I often do, as we started with a collective breath, it's sort of the way of connecting with all of you. I can see names in the attendees of people I love so dearly. So thank you for all joining us. Thank you to Yvonne for putting it on as well.
Absolutely.
So just, I'm going to take a breath and a breath out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been so much fun. I love chatting all things telepractice. So please stalk me, and you can find me on LinkedIn if you don't want to email me. It'd be great to catch up with some more people who are all excited about it now.
Yeah, perfect. I'm going to reach out and hold your hands.
High fives.
High backs. Yeah, high fives all the way. Well done. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for everyone for participating and for your ideas.
Bye-bye.
Bye.